Mark Zuckerberg recently made an announcement that his two companies, Facebook and Instagram, are going to be taking greater measures to protect, and I quote here, free expression. And I mean, I'll believe it when I see it personally, but the video is actually very interesting, and I think that there's a lot of information in this 5-minute video that we can unpack that is quite rich because, of course, there are lots of different factors here. One of the explicit reasons he actually says he's doing this is the recent election, and that is, of course, the election of Donald Trump. And it's interesting that he just openly says, well, Trump's been elected, so we're changing our policies, because that seems like something that you wouldn't necessarily choose to do if you wanted to save face, because it makes it sound like you've been made to do it. However, I'm going to break down why he might be saying that, and I'm going to play the video a little bit in sections, and we're going to talk about the implications of each thing he's saying, because there's a lot of important things there. And of course, it's worth mentioning as well, as of November of 2024, Facebook had just over 3 billion monthly active users, and Instagram had 2 billion as of April of 2024. And of course, assuming that he is being genuine about what they are going to do, and it isn't misrepresenting what is actually going to happen, which is possible, that is going to be a huge thing, and a very large section of the internet that is going to go a very similar way to Elon Musk's X, formerly Twitter. There's going to be more avenues of potential free speech platforms. Is it going to be to the same degree as Elon Musk owning Twitter? I don't know. I don't think there's the same appetite. And there's also the fact, of course, that Elon Musk did suspend some accounts that disagreed with him, which I don't agree with. But why is it happening now? And one of the things I've done here is included a tweet merely because I would forget how I put it previously, not to be, patting myself on the back, just like that was a good one, as it wasn't really. But it's, social media firms have a strong incentive to cozy up to Trump, facing large-scale regulations and hefty fines from Europe. Also, Zuckerberg explicitly mentions this, as well as countries like China outright banning them. And we'll talk about this in a bit more detail. Trump might help them avoid these penalties, but my worry is how much influence they'll have on his administration in return. And that's something that I want to sort of continue to identify, because the allegiance of the tech bros, as people call them, I think it's a bit of a lame name, don't give them that level of credibility. The tech nerds is probably better. They've all aligned with Trump now, and why has it come now rather than over the past 8 years when Trump was potentially running for office, right? Well, I don't think they've suddenly all changed their mind about Donald Trump's character. I think it's just that he can offer them something that the Democrats couldn't, and we'll be getting on to that soon enough. So, here is the video of a newly human Mark Zuckerberg. All of that working out. He's been doing martial arts. He did that really cool photo op where he was on like a wakeboard being dragged around, and he had the American flag or something like that.
I haven't seen it, to be honest.
He was in a tuxedo holding the American flag with sunglasses on.
Okay.
It's just like, okay, that's kind of cool. I'll give you that. Probably been deliberately helping repair his image, because people speculating on the one hand whether you're a robot, on the other whether you're a reptile, isn't the best PR I've heard.
No, it's not.
But I'm going to play the first 40 seconds here, and of course tell me what you make of it in the comments as well, but we'll be breaking it down too. So here we are.
Hey everyone.
Man himself.
I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly.
Okay, so there are a few things I picked out here. The first of which is get back to our roots. And of course, this is a tacit admission that they have strayed from the path of free expression, because he introduces that as being their roots. And so in so doing, he's sort of in a more polite way to himself, saying that, listen, we went a bit too far. Please forgive us, isn't he? And of course, it's worth mentioning as well that, as a practical example of this, on January 6th, they removed the video of Donald Trump saying, "Go home and be peaceful," which, of course, allowed politicians later on down the line to say it was encouraged by him, even though what he did do was release statements on all of the platforms he had access to, telling them to be peaceful and to go home.
Right, so I think there are several things to unpack here, and the whole video is very rich for interpretation. One thing is to say that what he says is an admission that free expression was curtailed. He admits it. But he also says, I wanted to give people a voice, without saying a voice about what, in order to give the impression that his principles were pro-free speech.
I also interpreted that as to say that he's not necessarily the one calling the shots 100%, which I can definitely believe that, you know, I don't think it's Mark Zuckerberg looking at some small account saying, you know what, shut them down.
Well,
I think he's got a big team around him, and you know, they might be doing stuff that he doesn't want them to. And also, does he really have 100% control over his own company?
I don't know to what extent he controls his company or not, but he is trying to give the idea, the impression that he was against it, but it happened against his will. Personally, I'm a bit suspicious when I hear people saying this. And also I think that one of the reasons why a lot of the people, you know, within quotation marks, we'll call tech bros, are making statements of the sort is because they want to somehow give the impression that as a lobby, they don't have the amount of power that they actually have.
And also, of course, if they cozy themselves up to Trump, a lot of them rely on selling people's data to advertisers, particularly Facebook. That's how it makes its money. And so there are lots of privacy concerns around that kind of business model. And if they're like, well, we're for free speech, it sort of sanitizes this practice in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And let me just add something about the tech industry. The tech industry requires a lot of raw minerals. A lot of them come from Ukraine, and others come from may come from Greenland, as we're going to talk about in the next segment.
Bit of foreshadowing. But it is worth mentioning as well that he uses the term explicitly, online harms. And in the UK, we have an online harms bill. And this is also the language of the European Union. And so by using that word, he's sort of implying that he is on board with what Europe is trying to do. He's like, listen, I understand there's some bad stuff and we're trying our best to remove it. So what he's trying to do is basically play both sides. He's saying, I'm for free expression, but I recognize there are online harms. So he's trying to navigate this tightrope between placating America and placating Europe. And by that, he means the political establishments, not necessarily the people in the countries, right? Because I don't think people in Europe are clamoring for online censorship. It's mainly politicians, so it can give them an ability to exert control.
And the same applied for politicians in the US before.
Exactly. And, you know, it also gives them a lot of power, these European countries, because, and he states it's political, and he says, if you can threaten, I say, if you can threaten a company with large fines or a refusal to do business in that country, it basically allows you to have negotiation power over what they can show. And so if they can punish the company financially for platforming people that they disagree with, then they will do so. And that's what's going on here. I think it's exerting power over this company by trying to get them to do what they want politically is what's going on with Europe in particular. And if we quickly go to this before coming back, here, Brussels, of course, which is where the EU is based, fines Facebook parent company 800 million euros, which is a lot of money. And I imagine that is a point of concern for Mark Zuckerberg. And he's obviously also right about there is some bad stuff out there that the vast majority of people don't want to see. And I think him talking about child exploitation and terrorism, and I imagine what he means by terrorism isn't necessarily, you know, we want to cover up that it happens, more so some of the videos you see sometimes unfortunately doing the rounds of the gruesome ways in which people have died.
Exactly.
And I think that it's important for people who are journalists to be able to see that sort of thing. However, I don't think it should just pop up on people's feeds when they don't want to see it. Exactly. I think that that's a reasonable balance between the two.
Here we are not talking about just someone expressing a critical view of the establishment and that being, we're talking about the real thing.
Exactly. And so let's carry on with this. And this is a little bit of a shorter bit, but there's also a lot to...
So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do.
So one thing that is the most important to point out here is he describes censoring people's opinions as mistakes, but the people within Meta, within Facebook and Instagram, knew what they were doing and did it willingly. It wasn't a mistake. I think that this is very clever reframing, because he can say, well, that in hindsight they were mistakes. I didn't want to do this necessarily, but it happened. So Zuckerberg can save face whilst also suggesting that these things weren't deliberate choices. Of course, we know with the Twitter files that the FBI was requesting people censor very small accounts that were critical of certain aspects of the Biden administration. And that's very insidious. Of course, we don't know whether that's going on with Facebook because they've not said, but I'd be very surprised if it hadn't.
Yeah.
And that they weren't censoring people on behalf of governments.
Well, he's trying to just minimize it.
Yeah. And he also says, we built a lot of complex systems, that specific phrase, which makes it sound very computational, but there is, of course, a human element to this. A lot of these choices were made by human beings, but it makes it sound like it's just our algorithm made a mistake. But that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Skynet.
He does at least admit they have made mistakes, and I think it's also interesting, again, that he mentions the US election. I know I said that at the start, but if you're trying to be really corporate and uncontroversial and try and please both sides to make money, you wouldn't necessarily say that. And so what it makes me think is that he's signaling to the Trump administration that they wish to have some sort of working relationship. And imagine that this onus comes from the fact that there's going to be a vacancy where the Biden administration was basically telling them what to do. And what Zuckerberg probably wants to do here by cozying up to Trump is saying, listen, if we do what you want in terms of keeping our platform relatively pro-free speech, then you can help us fight China censoring Facebook and Instagram, and also Europe coming after us with big fines. And, I think Trump is probably the guy to do that for him as well.
Yeah, I mean, they're exchanging extra influence for them, for the tech bros, in exchange for the image of Trump as liberating the society of America.
Exactly.
And as creating that wave of liberation and maximizing civil liberties.
Right. I've been doing a lot of talking. I need to do more video.
First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote non-stop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system.
So there are a few things here that I wanted to pick up on. His use of the term legacy media is interesting because this is sort of dog whistle to right-wing spheres, isn't it?
Yeah.
As a way of denigrating the mainstream media. It's a way to appeal to Trump supporters, basically. And I find it interesting that he says, we tried in good faith to address concerns about misinformation, right? That about misinformation wasn't the direct quote, but that's what he's talking about. And of course, Twitter was censoring people on behalf of the intelligence agencies and the Biden administration, but he talks about the media wanting to censor people, which, insulting the media with their popularity as it is not something that's necessarily going to have much pushback in the same way as him saying, actually, we're told to censor it by the government. And so he's pointed to something that's more socially acceptable whilst avoiding something that would be more useful to society, which sort of suggests that he's going along with this for self-interested reasons rather than out of principle.
It's not exactly like Facebook wasn't a mainstream platform.
I know, yeah.
At least the way it was operating. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He also admits that fact checkers are too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they have created, which is true. Yeah. And he also mentions the X style of community notes, which is actually quite a significant thing because it's a huge admission that they work. And that's good, because I think the community notes aspect of Elon Musk's X is the best aspect of it. And I think the community notes easily, I don't know whether this is your experience, is the best improvement other than the sort of democratization of the platform more generally, removing the censorship.
Yeah, I think they're helping, especially on X. Community notes are good occasionally. Sometimes they're horribly bad. But it's better than nothing.
Exactly.
Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms.
So I think that it's interesting here that he says the content policies on immigration and gender are out of touch with mainstream discourse. That's an admission that discourse has moved rightward, really, isn't it? Because those topics weren't forbidden on the right. In fact, they were our avenues of attack towards the left. So the fact that they're saying they're out of touch is simply that we're no longer enforcing... That was a nice voice crack, wasn't it? We're no longer enforcing the hegemonic will of the left because we recognise we've got new masters, basically. Yeah. And one thing I did find interesting is that he's sort of twisting the knife on woke a bit there by saying what started out as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down discourse and shut out people, and it has gone too far. And the "it has gone too far" is the most forceful thing that he says in the whole speech. Yeah. And although it sounds a little bit manufactured, I think that it's interesting that he's placing a lot of emphasis on this. This might be courting the right again.
I think it is, and it's important in a way. I'll believe the changes when I see them, just like you said in the beginning. But it's quite a thing when someone like Zuckerberg, who owns Facebook and administrates it, if I'm not mistaken, when he makes out an admission of the sort.
Yeah, well, he's one of the most powerful people in the world, isn't he? And
it is sort of a paradigm shift.
It is, yeah. And so let's carry on.
Third, we're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that scanned for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high-severity violations. And for lower severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action. The problem is that the filters make mistakes, and they take down a lot of content that they shouldn't. So by dialing them back, we're going to dramatically reduce the amount of censorship on our platforms. We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down.
So I think that what he's doing here in this part is sort of going along that tightrope between America and Europe. He's doing two things by focusing on illegal and more severe violations. He reassures European regulators that more resources will be directed to enforcing the law on their platform, which is how they're framing the money grab and the grab for control over his companies, and without sounding like he'll censor things in a way that would annoy Trump supporters. And so it's quite clever, really. I mean, although it's relatively obvious if you follow politics that this is the thing to do with your company to navigate that difficult path between either side of the Atlantic.
He made two different statements there. On the one hand, he phrased it as bad and good stuff. But on the other, he said about less severe violations and less severe violations. When we focus on the violations bit, it means that the content policies won't change. They are going to be there. It's just that they are going to go after the severe violations, which is a reason for skepticism as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning as well that he discusses the fact that reporting someone could still lead to the post removal and to suspensions. It's just not automatic anymore. Someone has to report you, and then something happens. And therefore, it could be the case that people will cotton on to the fact that, oh, if I report stuff I don't like, it might be removed automatically, which creates the same situation, more or less, that existed in the first place, and could reverse everything. So the sort of devil is in the detail here, even though he does say the threshold will be higher for things being removed, which, you know, if you make that claim publicly, you've got to back it up with something. If it's the same, then it's going to be embarrassing. But anyway.
Fourth, we're bringing back civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed. So we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again. So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive. Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas. As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams.
So there are lots of interesting things here that I wanted to break down. I know I'm going a little bit over time, but I'm going to keep it quick. So the reintroduction of political content to his platforms could either be a good or bad thing depending on how they do it. And he hasn't really given much information about how it's going to go about. So you kind of need to see more information. You might have some opinions about just generally, do people want to see, is it appealing to the right kinds of people to see this sort of content? But it's just difficult to say now because we don't know what's going to happen. And I think moving their team out of California to Texas is the funniest aspect of this, because the intention is, without explicitly saying, that a Texas-based team will be less censorious than a California-based team, right? And note that he also states that they're moving there because people will be less concerned about the team based there, not because they'll be better.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a slip-up on whoever wrote his speech for him, because if you've got the right set of ears, you can hear that he's saying, I'm more concerned about perception than I am actual results, which is important. And also, of course, Texas is more pro-business, and lots of Californians are fleeing there anyway. So if you wanted your Californians with Texas laws, you can do that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's going to change. So this is the final part now. So you're almost free from having to look at Mark Zuckerberg. I'm sorry.
Finally,
sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just I wanted to add that this is, I would say, a blow to the image of Gavin Newsom as someone who is good economically speaking for California, because in our circles, if you say anything positive about Gavin Newsom in California, everyone say you're mad, and you are. But a lot of Democrats think that for some reason that he has been exceptionally good for California.
Well, it's because California's got they've got a lot of business there, but it's not because Gavin Newsom has made it so. It's that he inherited a good situation.
Yeah, but this is a blow in the public image, and as you said, image is of paramount importance here.
we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there. Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored our apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government. And that's why it's been so difficult over the past 4 years when even the US government has pushed for censorship. By going after us and other American companies, it has emboldened other governments to go even further. But now we have the opportunity to restore free expression, and I am excited to take it. It'll take time to get this right, and these are complex systems. They're never going to be perfect. There's also a lot of illegal stuff that we still need to work very hard to remove. But the bottom line is that after years of having our content moderation work focus primarily on removing content, it is time to focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our systems, and getting back to our roots about giving people a voice. I'm looking forward to this next chapter. Stay good out there, and more to come soon.
Okay, so there's less to object to here, I think, but the questions are more about his intentions. Do I think that Mark Zuckerberg is doing all of this purely for the preservation of free expression for the American people and the other users of his websites and apps? No. I think it's that these other countries are limiting their potential to make profit, and that's what's driving it. Maybe I'm cynical. I mean, Zuckerberg has said some things publicly that were controversial. Like, he talked about how he personally didn't object to people denying the Holocaust on Facebook, which is a very bold thing to say publicly, but it at least suggests some degree of understanding of the problem. Whether he was saying this to try and placate people in the past, I don't know, but maybe there is some belief there. I don't want to be unfair necessarily, but yes, it seems like the ragging on Europe for being censorious and Latin America for being corrupt and China for blocking them entirely, that's fair. I don't think I can object to that much. And I also think it's interesting that he did refer explicitly then to the Biden regime censoring, which at the very end is good, but a lot of the meat and potatoes is out of the way, and it's sort of like sweeping it under the rug a little bit by mentioning it right at the end. And two final things I wanted to mention before I finish up is that Meta says fact checkers were the problem, and then fact checkers rule it false, and that fact checking groups have fact checked Mark Zuckerberg's claim about fact checkers, and they found him false because they want to have a job and he disagrees. And then it's also worth mentioning as well, I don't know how true this is, the International Fact Checking Network, which I didn't even know existed, has convened an emergency meeting of its members tomorrow following Meta's announcement that it will end third-party fact-checking partnerships in the US. And they were basically propping up the industry. And so this means that a lot of fact-checkers are going to go out of business, which is music to my ears, if this is true, because I hate fact-checkers. That I think it's basically saying my version of reality is true and yours is wrong, even though they're no more valid.
And I hate
saying
dialogue.
so. Yes, exactly. And so if everything Zuckerberg says is as it seems, this is a very positive development. However, we're obviously both very cynical about his intentions and the legitimacy of the pursuit of these things. I think it might well be motivated by money. Doesn't mean it won't necessarily get better, but that's what seems to be happening. If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.